Today, I want to give you some tips on roleplay for your ability scores and introduce you to a 12-point distribution system that I use for my games that I think is better than the current standard array and I think your players will love. If you haven't had a chance, I'd recommend go looking at the Tasha's video. We looked at what some of the recommendations that Tasha gave in that very first chapter and how I thought that was essentially starting to dismantle the very basic roleplay of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I always believe there's exceptions and you can choose very unique backgrounds, but at the same time, a lot of times players don't want to use those racial traits just because it doesn't benefit how strong they want to make their character. And the main thing I wanted to point out about that video is that those racial traits, those ability scores, all those things that you get, those are role play for your character. We first started looking at some basic stats, but then we went and we looked at the actual descriptions of the different races and found where within that text of those descriptions we can tie all those ability score increases and some of those racial traits to the role play of that race for Dungeons and Dragons. What I want to focus on today is those ability scores. In part of that video, we talked about how those ability score increases is part of your customization for your character. And on top of that, those ability score increases, even when you're using the standard array or the 46 method, that those increases should all be tied into some type of role play. What we're looking at here are the two main methods people use to build their ability scores on their players in Dungeons and Dragons. The first is the 46, subtract one die and keep the highest of the three dice, and then do that for all six ability scores. The second is called their standard array, where you essentially have fixed numbers, six of them, which you can distribute to any of the ability scores you're interested in increasing, specifically related to the class that you're interested in playing. In that same video, we talked about how the commoner really has only 10 across all their ability scores, and how that 46 method or the standard array, you're going to have scores that are higher than what a commoner has. And if you're using the standard array, we already can see that those numbers are higher than what's listed on the commoner scores. And what I was trying to point out is when you're looking at those ability scores and you're distributing those points, that is customization of your character. And you can try to tie some type of role play to that ability score increase. So what I wanted to do is just give you some tips on how you can do that. So you can see here, I'm not going to read through all of these, but I'll just pick a select few. We're looking at strength. You can see that you're a hard laborer. Maybe you're an exercise enthusiast. Or if we're looking at dexterity, maybe you spend a lot of time jumping obstacles. Or you were a huge fan of a game such as hide and seek, which helped you with your stealth. For constitution, maybe every morning you were a sprinter. You got up every morning and did some type of exercise. What if you were adapted to less sleep than other people in your tribe? If we look at intelligence, you can be a person who read a lot of books, you read a lot of lore, maybe arcana. If we're looking at wisdom, maybe you spend time reading people's body language, trying to see if people are lying, but through facial twitches, things like that. And if you're a charismatic character and you're adding points to that, you can say maybe you're a smooth talker, or maybe you got a really good poker face. There comes in the deception. Now, this is just a list of some role play that I think you can use for your character when you're giving those increases for the ability scores. You can easily include these or integrate these with that background that you chose for your character as well. If you're interested in looking at more than just this list here, one thing you can easily do, it's a little in your face, but you kind of just tend to ignore, is you can just look straight at the ability scores, look at the skills that are associated with that. Then you can use those skills that are tied to the ability scores as part of the role play as well. Just very quickly, very simply, strength, the only thing that's attached to it is athletics. So you can say your character was always involved in town athletics, in town events, any traditional event in your town, such as throwing boulders. I'm not going to read the rest because you can easily go to your character sheet, you look at the different skills associated with each ability score, and attach that role play with that ability score and that skill together. Another thing I wanted to talk about, why session zero can be bad. Things that happen during session zero can stress out other players, especially when other players are rolling better than others. Now, the main issue I think with session zero is that everybody gets to see each other's scores, right? You sit in a group, everybody rolls those dice. We get to see literally who rolls an 18, 15, 14, or who has a bad day, rolls a bunch of eights, 10s, and 12s, right? And what happens is, as everybody is watching their ability score rolls, we start to get this weird feeling of unfairness. if we are the character that's not rolling as high as everybody else. Now, when you talk to an old player such as myself, we used to do a 3d6 method only, no 4d6, just 3d6. And whatever that number was the number your character was going to get. And that kind of ties into one of my videos when it talks about grit between 1E or the earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons versus the newer editions such as 5E. In the first edition, you rolled your 3d6, you just took the score, whatever scores you got for those 6 different abilities, you just had to distribute them and then figure out what kind of class were you suited for. And we took this very serious. There was a neighbor I had named Jamie who one time came up to us and said, "Hey man, I rolled a character with the 18 strength, 18 constitution, and an 18 dexterity." We were like, "No way." What did he do? He said, "Come on, let me show you at my house what I did." We all walked over there, pulled out like 20 character sheets, and those 20 character sheets had ability scores that for all the times that he had rolled dice until he finally got the combination of attributes that he wanted. That's how serious we took it back then. There was no fudging. There was no sugarcoating. Nobody shared points. No, the DM wasn't generous and let you roll an extra 1d4 to add to it. You were stuck with the points that you were given on that 3d6 roll, and you had to deal with it. And if you didn't get the scores that you wanted, you were forced to waste your time, take that character sheet, and throw it away. When you think about a company, a lot of times it is asked amongst the bosses, do not talk to each other about each other's salary. This is very similar to this D6 rolling method in Dungeons and Dragons. When you know what the person next to you makes, even if they make $5,000 more than you, $2,000 more than you might get a little upset because you guys are essentially doing the same job. That's why I think in some ways, if you decide to use the 46 method, rolling the 46 should be something that should not happen at session 0. Now it's kind of weird because you should be able to openly, share your ability scores with other players, but it does tend to leave a little resentment or certain players feeling bad because their scores are not as high as everybody else. Now, if you want to avoid any weird feelings, I think giving out standard array is the best way to do it. Because in this way, everybody has the exact same 6 numbers that they can distribute, and then there's nobody that's outrolling anybody else. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you my method. So what we talked about previously is when you use that standard array, you have a 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and an 8. What is that 8? I do not understand. If you look at a commoner stat, they have 10s all across the board. So for some reason, your hero has to suck at one thing compared to a commoner, which is something I don't agree with. So I'm going to show you a method that I think you should try to employ at your table that could make it a little bit more fair. So if we look at those standard arrays and we add all those points together, 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8, and you can see that I did that on my calculator on my desktop, you can see the number is 72. Now, let's compare that to a commoner statistics. If we add all those 6 ability score 10s, you're obviously going to get a 60. So the difference between a commoner and a hero when playing Dungeons and Dragons is really the 72 minus the 60 is 12 points. Okay? So you as a hero have 12 more points to distribute across those ability scores. So what I think you should do when everybody's building their characters is essentially start them out with the standard array of a commoner. So 10s across all the ability scores. Then take that 12-point difference from the hero and the commoner, and now you can distribute these 12 points any way you want across these 6 different ability scores. You can customize your character any way you want using those 12 points. Now, the only thing I will add is make sure when you're doing these point distributions to keep in mind your racial traits, the ability score increases you'll get from those. This way you can still power game the way you want to. I hope that 12-point distribution was really useful for you guys. And always remember, whenever you're distributing those points, keep in mind the role play that's associated with those points as well. Because remember, here at RPG Boons, we talk about everything RPG and how everything is RP. I'm Don Franco 3. Please leave a comment in the comments section. I'll get back to you, and I'll catch you later.